We spent a lot of time recently talking about rookies, rookie rankings, rookie drafts, and just where you should take these guys, how you should value them. Today, we're going to take a larger, broader overall look at consensus dynasty rankings. Matt Lawson is back. We'll bring him in here in just a few minutes. And he has compiled, I believe it's 7 different dynasty rankings to get it just kind of a consensus ranking of a ton of different players, in the league, how you should value them, how they stack up against each other. Like I said, this includes 7 rankings. Mine are not included in this. I'm working on mine right now, and hopefully they will be done shortly, within the next few days. That is my plan, so that it eventually can be added into this. And then we can compare it against it. I have it started so we can compare what I have for a handful of players versus what I guess the rest of the industry has. And Matt will be here to talk about it as well. This is the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball podcast, which is part of the Old Man Squad Sports Network and now part of Believe Network. Before I bring Matt in, I just want to remind you guys that BetOnline continues to be your number one source for all your sports betting action. And with baseball season in full swing and football season around the corner, BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news and scores, and even live in-game betting. From the MLB to UFC to tennis and NFL futures, BetOnline remains your choice for sports wagering info. And in between the games, you can head over to the BetOnline casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker and a live casino. Head to the website today and take advantage of their industry-leading VIP program with level-up bonuses and weekly cash boosts. BetOnline, the game starts here. Alrighty, and Matt is back here with us. We are going to pull up the consensus dynasty rankings here in just a moment. But before we do that, Matt, how are you? And can you tell me just a little bit about your overall process with compiling this and what all is involved in this?
Yes, I've been doing this for a few years now. My attempt to be able to pull together all of the dynasty rankings available on the internet, behind paywalls, in the free space. And what I tried to do here is get everyone who had put out a ranking in the last month. So kind of capturing the results of the NBA draft, capturing the results of free agency to some degree. They all came out at different times, but this gives you a really good idea of where the market stands. And this is a volatile market in the middle of the offseason. A lot is changing. A lot will change in dynasty rankings, but this is an opportunity to make offseason trades that capitalize on where the consensus is on players. So not only does it matter where this consensus is, because it's probably telling you what people in your league think. These are obviously smart dynasty managers who have taken the time to be able to pull together dynasty rankings, ranking hundreds of players in some cases. They include my rankings. There's different opinions across the board here. And what you can see in these rankings when we pull them up is that there's a wide range of opinions on a lot of managers and for a lot of players by these managers. And there's a reason to be able to think, well, if these quote unquote analysts or experts can disagree this much on these guys, people in my league could disagree this much too. And that's where the opportunity can come. If you're high on a player, the person who rosters them might not be nearly that high. And this will give you an idea of the range of what kind of players you could offer. If you see that a player has a low ranking that is down in the 150s, you might be able to offer a player in the 150s to be able to get that guy from someone else in your league. And you might see that the high ranking is a price that you're unwilling to pay. So you might understand when they're rejecting all of your offers, maybe the other manager thinks that highly, as high as that other dynasty analyst of that player. So I don't really have a chance to get him because I don't value him that way. So not only is the average important, but I find the high and low ranking, the range of opinion on a player also really matters because it's very informative about the range of opinion on that particular prospect or veteran player.
Yeah, and I think some people get too tied into individual dynasty rankings. Like maybe you find one ranking online that you really like and it plays a little bit into what you believe, or it's very different from what you think a player is, and you use that as almost like a negotiation tactic. But this here, just like a compilation of 7 different rankings just to kind of see where players are, really does give you, I guess, kind of the honest truth to how people should value it. And then your individual biases as a manager that could make you really good or really bad in your dynasty league, using that to your advantage. I don't know. It just makes it a lot of fun, and it actually gives you better data than just, well, see here, this dynasty ranking has this player ranked at 17 and this player ranked at 18. So this is a fair trade. You need to make this trade with me no matter what. obviously that turns into the not fun part of playing in dynasty leagues.
Yeah, I think sometimes in trade negotiations, someone will throw out some dynasty ranking. They'll say, well, hashtag basketball has this player here, or this other ranking that I found has them here. Matt Lawson has them here. This is a nice way to be able to take that opinion and say, okay, but also there's these opinions, and there's the average is actually way over here. That's an outlier for this reason. So it's another tool in your tool belt in negotiation to be able to find a middle ground, find a compromise, find a deal with others in your league. I think it can be really helpful for that as well.
100%. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up here. It's going to only show a couple at a time, but not too many surprises here at the top, and there really shouldn't be. It's a pretty consensus top 4, and none of the rankings included in this veer away from that. With Victor Wembanyama at 1, SGA at 2, Jokic at 3, Luka Doncic at 4. That's basically how it should be, and I believe, if I'm reading this right, Matt, that's exactly where you fell with these guys as well.
I am actually, yeah, that's right. I'm in the same place on this one for category leagues and points leagues. I'm a little bit different, but this is kind of a rare time of peace in the dynasty world where every single ranking has these as the top 4. There's no one who deviates from that. There's some variation within it, but everyone has Victor at number 1. There is like near consensus amongst the consensus here across these 4 players, and it's understandable. I mean, we've now had multiple seasons of these guys showing, at least from a per game perspective, depending on availability, that they are the truly elite fantasy players out there, and that's true across both points, categories, formats. Where you're playing 8-cat, 9-cat, whatever kind of point format you're in. These 4 are elite players, and it should take quite a bit to be able to pry them off of your roster. I'll remind people, I saw some trades being thrown around on whether it was Reddit or maybe it was on the Fantasy Basketball International Discord. When you're trading away these players, you better be getting a bunch of the players who we're about to look at who are just below them. Do not break apart superstar players into 5 or 6 solid to okay assets. That kind of trade will lead to years of regret. If you are a rebuilding roster and you have one of these top 4 in Victor Wembanyama, SGA, Jokic, or Doncic on your team, you just build around them. You continue to do it regardless of what your timeline is, regardless of how far along you are in your rebuild or your contention window. These are players that you hold. You would need to be absolutely bowled over to give up any of them.
100%. So I'm still working on my dynasty rankings currently, but I do have a lot of like the early parts finalized, and I do also fall in the same top 4 here. I have Wemby, SGA, Luka, Jokic, but again, like where you have the 4, other than Wemby at 1, I think that's pretty much solidified, and then you can have the next 3 in any of those 3 spots, and it's totally fine. And then we have, moving on, Cade Cunningham, Anthony Edwards, Cooper Flagg, Chet Holmgren, and then Jalen Williams there up next. I think obviously Cooper Flagg's the interesting one here, having him ranked as high as 6th, as low as 8th between these rankings. I think when I've been trying to do this, I've been trying to say, okay, if I were on the clock with the number 5 pick, who would I take? And I think that's the difference between who would I actually draft versus a ranking. Like I think in a ranking, I would pretty easily say, okay, yeah, Cade Cunningham probably has the 5th most value right now to me. But I think if I were on the clock with the number 5 pick, there's no reason like why I wouldn't at least consider it and probably actually take Cooper Flagg, even if I'd rank Cade Cunningham higher at this point, just because that would be a strategy that I would be able to lean into pretty heavily with, as far as going incredibly young and kind of rebuilding in a sense, and then targeting players in this talented 2026 class. Because Cooper Flagg's gonna be really good in year 1, but obviously not at the same level as some of these other guys around here. But I don't know, is Cooper Flagg in the conversation at 5 for you, or are you still just saying it's got to be Cade Cunningham there?
No, these 3 are kind of their own tier. I think Chet and Jalen Williams come into the equation next, but Cade, Anthony Edwards, and Cooper Flagg, I think, are the next tier below our elite top 4. And there's arguments for all 3 to get significantly better, even than what our projections are for their primes, and for different reasons. I have Cade at number 5 in my categories rankings, because I've seen it already. And I think there's a really realistic path for growth from what he's already shown. And we started to see it last year, started getting to the line more often toward the end of the year, finally started to getting the respect of officials to be able to get calls, and got significantly stronger, which made a huge difference in his ability to be able to get to the rim and finish at the rim, which is still developing. He's still not a strong rim finisher. He gets to the rim now. He doesn't finish as strong as he needs to. The three-point shooting volume started to come back up last year to where it was kind of closer to his rookie season. It had dipped, and that had changed the fantasy projection for him. I think that can come up even more going forward with Cade. And we also started to see, as he got control of his offensive game, as he got more help from the shooters around him, he was able to expend a little bit more energy on the defensive end as well. We saw the defensive stats start to tick up the way they did for him in his rookie season as well, which had declined. So there's real opportunity for growth from Cade. I don't think we've seen the ceiling of what we saw from him last year, but it was an incredibly strong season from Cade Cunningham. So that makes me extremely bullish on him going forward. Same for Anthony Edwards, who continues to be able to add things to his game, it seems, every single season. The final piece is the playmaking. And we saw that with Devin Booker and Jason Tatum take a little bit of time to be able to develop, but eventually it did. And I think Anthony Edwards will be the same way. He can make basic reads right now. A lot of the times he has tunnel vision. His game is still developing, but once he begins to pass at a all-star level, which I think he will, then we're really going to see him pop. We're really going to see an expansion of what Anthony Edwards can be as a fantasy player. And that's why I have so much optimism on him as well. And Cooper Flagg, we don't know what we don't know yet. We know that he has an incredible fantasy stat set coming out of college, one of the best that we've ever seen coming out of college, coming into the pre-draft process. This is a near flawless fantasy player, and I think he's going to be incredible this season as a rookie and going forward. But there may be leaps to his game that we have not even seen yet. It could be that the defensive stat projections that we have for him are too modest. It could be that the three-point volume continues to escalate. We saw a huge leap from him as a shooter and an on-ball creator last year. There could be further leaps from there that we can't tell. When you're talking about players this talented, and these three are extraordinarily talented, there are often developments that are outlier developments that we don't usually see from other players that come out of nowhere that take them to a whole nother level, because this is the true top tier of NBA prospect talent in these three guys. I think that there's good cases for all of them to be able to improve significantly. And that's why I think they make so much sense at 5, 6, and 7 in any order that you put them in.
For sure. And that's exactly why it pretty much came out that way in most of these rankings. I see the lowest for Anthony Edwards and Cooper Flagg was 8, with Chet moving up to 7 at some point. But based on that, like, you can also see the high and low for Chet is 7 and 16, for Jalen Williams 8 and 15. So it is kind of a pretty clear tier break. I'd say that's pretty fair to put that there. So after that, I guess next tier we have Chet, Jalen Williams, and then LaMelo Ball, Trae Young, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Evan Mobley. But you can see that things are changing a little bit, and now it's not everyone kind of having these players in these specific ranges. It's some of these players ending up pretty high, some of them ending up a little bit lower. Pretty specifically, you can see what the difference between where you have them versus consensus. You are the lowest on Trae Young at 22. Somebody has him as high as 7, with everyone else falling in between there. Why are you a little bit lower on Trae Young and compared to, I guess, everyone else?
So if you take a look at my Dynasty rankings, I have a process behind it. It's not really just kind of me looking at one player versus another and saying, I'm going to have this guy higher. I want to have a basis in their fantasy stat set for saying, I think this player is better than this player in fantasy. The way that I do it is that I look at individual categories for category leagues, and I'm taking each category at its face value to be able to say, is this player a positive, a neutral, a negative? Are they a strong elite positive? Are they a strong negative in the category? And I assign points kind of in a simplification of this. You get 1 point for being a strong positive, 2 points for being an elite positive. And the other side is on the negatives. -1 point for being a negative in a category where you're dragging down that category. And if you're a strong negative, like a Giannis Antetokounmpo and free throw percentage, that's a -2 points. And what ends up balancing out is something that is pretty similar to Z-score ranking, but I think better reflects the way that you win in fantasy. You win by getting to 5 categories more in winning in 5 categories versus your opponent only getting 4, or even better. So winning one category by a massive amount doesn't help you anymore. What you want are players who move the needle in enough categories to be able to push you toward winning. So we want needle movers. Trae Young is really strong in 3 categories, and that's obviously points, threes, and free throw percentage. Super helpful in those categories, but he also takes off a significant amount of field goal percentage, rebounds, and blocks. And also with Trae, there's obviously the strong production and assists. It nets out the way that you do his stat set, because it's kind of jagged, where it's really strong in some areas, really negative in others. I just have him in a tier lower than some of these other guys. And it's just because we know what his stat set is. There's limitations to it. You know what you're getting with him. I like it a lot. I don't think it's going to change or improve in any way. And I have the peak of it being just a notch below, a tier below overall, when you consider those net category rankings, a little bit lower than this group of guys, which is a pretty large tier. This is going, for me, from Jalen Williams through Giannis, through Karl Anthony Towns. There's a lot of guys who are kind of in this range for me. And, Trae's just a notch below that. So it looks like it's a big step, but it's because I have these players tiered, and Trae's fantasy profile just kind of puts him one step below those other guys.
Yeah. And he isn't actually a couple of these guys right here with LaMelo Ball, Trae, and Giannis have their significant weaknesses, and then their massive strengths as well. And if you build your team the right way, then these guys can be one of, if not up there with the most valuable players in fantasy basketball. But at the same time, if your team isn't built the right way in a category league, those weaknesses end up hurting you a ton. Whereas a guy like Jalen Williams, who consensus has just a touch above these guys, is a more well-rounded prospect that is really, I guess, strong in a number of different categories, but not super weak anywhere as well. So it doesn't really hurt you in too many ways. Evan Mobley, I think, is a guy that has the potential to be ranked a good bit higher on this list, but it's the situation that he's in that is preventing that. How much of a factor is him being in Cleveland alongside Jared Allen? How much do you consider that in your rankings? Do you just rank him how you would as just the player individually, or do you kind of say, oh, they seem to be pretty committed to this, let me bump him down a touch?
Yeah, it doesn't really impact me because of what Evan Mobley's shown in his ability to be able to produce with Jared Allen. And I think if anything, it gives hope that in a future where they do not have Jared Allen, which is going to happen, Evan Mobley will survive longer on the Cleveland Cavaliers than Jared Allen. That's almost assuredly going to happen. And in that scenario, we're going to see the continued evolution of Evan Mobley. It doesn't necessarily just have to involve him taking on big man stats. I think a lot of the growth for him this year was as a driver. His ability to be able to drive to the rim and continue to score super efficiently at the rim showed that there's almost like a light Giannis Antetokounmpo element to his game, without some of the drawbacks of Giannis's fantasy game. That's why I have him so high. I actually have Mobley at number 9 in categories, number 13 in points. I think you could even drive higher in points on my next update. I really like the future for him because he's shown that he's not just dependent on playing the center position, getting traditional big man stats. I think there's going to be continued growth with his 3-point shooting over time, as we've seen growth with his free throw percentage during stretches. I think that his assists and his playmaking has continued to develop, and it will go into the future as he has his hands on the ball more. There is a future with the Cavaliers where Evan Mobley is kind of at the center of everything that they do, because Donovan Mitchell is older than the rest of this timeline. I think there's going to come a point where they're either going to move on from him or he's just going to decline in effectiveness. And you're getting, continued rumblings. Maybe they're going to move Darius Garland to be able to get a little bit cheaper. We will see how long Dan Gilbert is willing to stay in this kind of second apron level for them. Clearly, they're indicating that this season they're willing to be able to pay that price to try to win a championship. If that doesn't happen, it's going to be interesting to be able to see what happens in Cleveland. But I can tell you Evan Mobley is going to be prominently involved in it. That's why I'm so confident in investing in him in Dynasty, regardless of format, because I think he's going to be an absolute fantasy superstar, a first rounder in redraft leagues across his prime. And we're just really getting to the start of it with Mobley. And it's hard to remember that he's only 24 years old, that we're only 4 years deep into his career, and that there's significant growth yet to come. I'm really excited for what the future holds for Evan Mobley going forward.
Yeah, so moving on past Evan Mobley, we have the next few players. I also am a very big fan of Evan Mobley. I think I'm going to settle with him around 9 as well on my rankings when they get published. The next few players, Amen Thompson, Jason Tatum, Tyrese Halliburton, pretty interesting players to talk about there. And then Tyrese Maxey, Karl Anthony Towns, Scotty Barnes. Amen Thompson, I think, is also kind of one of those recent risers that's going to be a top 10 player for a very, very long time. But the next two players are players that we talked about a good bit when we did the, I guess, mock draft, where it was just us two going through about the first 96 players. Jason Tatum and Tyrese Halliburton. How do we value these players? How do we, consider them considering the injuries that they just had that are career altering injuries? They're probably going to be out for all of next season, but when they're on the floor, there aren't too many players that are more productive than them in fantasy basketball. And they've generally been pretty available, especially Jason Tatum throughout their career. Do we not consider that as much of a factor now that they are probably going to miss all of next season?
I'm going to stay a strong Achilles tear optimist at this time, this dark time that we're in the NBA, where we are having more Achilles tears than we've ever seen before because of what we have just seen in this offseason. And it's unrelated to Jason Tatum or Tyrese Halliburton, but it directly applies to them. Tyrese Halliburton and Jason Tatum are 25 and 27 years old, respectively. They are young men. They are very much in the midst of their primes. We rarely see young players tear their Achilles tendons. We're suddenly starting to see it. But what we're also seeing this offseason is incredibly encouraging signs on the recovery of those players. Let's first start with De'Ron Holmes and the Vegas Summer League. Not only did he come back less than 1 year after his Achilles tear and play in Summer League, that shows an incredible amount of confidence in Denver to be able to put him out there less than a year later for Summer League competition. They didn't need to do that. He has a guaranteed contract. He didn't need to go play those games. They felt confident for him to be able to go out there and play in Vegas in the same setting where he tore his Achilles tendon. So he had a confidence in himself to be able to go out there and play already 363 days from the time that he had torn his Achilles in Vegas. That's incredible. We're seeing Isaiah Jackson tear his Achilles, around late October, early November of last year, along with James Wiseman. Both of them get signed to be able to come back to the Indiana Pacers. And Isaiah Jackson, especially, this is the indicator. Indiana knows exactly where he is in his recovery. They gave him a 3-year guaranteed contract. And this is a guy who was in restricted free agency. They didn't need to pay him. They had every bit of leverage to be able to do it. They did it anyway. Now, you can argue with the intelligence of that move. Maybe they should have driven a harder bargain, but it certainly shows confidence in Isaiah Jackson that Indiana was willing to say, you are going through this recovery. We've been watching you go through this recovery, and we are going to invest in you as if you were playing this year for us and being in our center rotation. So I think we will see Isaiah Jackson ready to go in October to be able to play for the Indiana Pacers, because that is the indication that they were given by that contract. Maybe they will play him slow, but at the very least, they are sending the signal, we believe that he's going to be able to come back. And these are young players coming back from this injury. And it gives us hope that we're going to see Tatum and Halliburton both come back. I don't think it's going to be this season. I think it will be for 26, 27, but that will be about almost 18 months removed, like Kevin Durant was when he came back and looked like himself again from that Achilles tear. And I think we're going to see them pretty much back to their normal level right away. And I think eventually we will see them fully back to their complete level. So yes, it's a hit. And these guys would both have been in my top 10 before the Achilles tear. I have them now in the similar range to where they are in the consensus. But I think that you can invest with them. If you don't need to win this year, these are great targets to be able to take on, because there's going to be great concern. You could probably get them lower than this consensus price from some managers who simply cannot wait. They already had teams that were ready to win. They had teams that were driven by Jason Tatum and Tyrese Halliburton. This is an opportunity, and I would have confidence in taking it based on what we are seeing in Achilles tear recoveries across the league.
100%. I think, but like you said, both these guys are pretty much consensus top 10 players if they didn't tear their Achilles. And now we have them ranked as high as 11 and 12, as low as 22 and 23, evening out in the middle as far as where the consensus has them. But incredibly talented players that are going to be dominant in fantasy basketball once they get back. That's what we'd assume. Guess there is the unknown that maybe things don't go as flawlessly, but based on all the recent evidence that you just said, we should feel fairly confident that they're going to come back and still be very impactful players. So if you are in a situation where you aren't trying to win this year, like I'm in my home league, I'm in a situation where I'm trying to win. So I just traded Tyrese Halliburton actually like 15 minutes before we got on the show. Because that makes sense for my team direction. The next few players after that, because I think Tyrese Maxey, Karl-Anthony Towns, Scotty Barnes, kind of fair where they have them. Not super interesting to me to talk about them, but Jalen Johnson at 20. Then we have Devin Booker, 21, Alperen Şengün, 22, Jaren Jackson Jr. 23, Domantas Sabonis 24. I think Jalen Johnson's obviously the most interesting one to me, and he's a guy that I know both of us are very high on. I have him currently at 13, but I think you're the one that had him as high as 11. So what has you so high on Jalen Johnson? And do the injuries, which I'll kind of answer this myself, but like the injuries being ankle injuries and then 2 different shoulder injuries, maybe we're not super concerned about his durability because it's just a bunch of random things that keep happening. Is that kind of how you're feeling as well?
Yeah, I think that this is kind of a pet peeve of mine in fantasy, because I think we conflate any injuries into being injury prone without looking at the context, looking at the individual injuries. Now, if it is a guy injuring the same thing over and over again, the same area of the body getting injured repeatedly, yes, there is a structural issue there that is going to probably limit their availability going forward. If a player has had bad luck injuries that have nothing to do with each other, unless you believe they just have brittle bones or weaker ligaments than other people, which is not based in science or any data that you would be able to have, there's no reason to be able to call them injury prone. This creates buying opportunities every single year. People have already forgotten that Jalen Johnson, the trajectory that he was on in this past season, I think he's going to be even better this year. And for me, the fantasy stat set is why you're investing in Jalen Johnson above a player like Scotty Barnes, because with Scotty Barnes, I have significant questions about his ability to be able to shoot the basketball. I know that Jalen Johnson is not going to be a high volume 3-point shooter, but he does take and make threes at a much better level than Scotty Barnes does at this point. And I like his overall fantasy stat set just a little bit more. I love Scotty too. I have him at number 17 in categories, number 19 in points. I think he's someone to invest in going forward, because I think even if he doesn't shoot at a high level, he has a lot of different ways to be able to contribute. But with Jalen, not only is there the present with Trae Young, where he can be so valuable in fantasy, where I think he has the potential to be an all-star this year in the Eastern Conference. On top of that, I think that there's a future potentially without Trae Young, where Jalen Johnson really gets to be able to step into the spotlight, and you could have an even different level above this with the usage vacuum that would be created by Trae Young's departure. So regardless, this is a time to be able to buy on Jalen Johnson in all formats. I don't think people value him. You see the consensus having him at 20. That already says that there's buying room. I think in your average league, the opinion on Jalen Johnson might even be lower than that, because people get so caught up on games played. Oh, this guy, I'm done with him. He keeps getting hurt. There is every reason to think that we're about to get a full, productive, huge fantasy season from Jalen Johnson. I'd be buying.
And the other player, I guess, kind of in this range that I'm a little curious about, because I know you've been very high on Alperen Sengun at the past, and you have him ranked at 19. Consensus has him, anywhere from 17 to 38, and I think that's a pretty wide range, makes him worth talking about. Is there any concern with you about Alperen Sengun moving forward? I know they added Kevin Durant. How does he fit in with Houston? Does it even matter how he fits in with Houston? Because kind of if he ends up getting traded somewhere else for some reason, then he's still going to be a really good fantasy player, because the offense is going to kind of probably run through him if he's in a different situation. Is there definitely a scenario where he gets ranked much higher moving forward?
Yeah, this is the case where you actually need to understand beyond the box score to understand what's going on with the prospect, because Alperen Sengun, there was a lot going on this past season with him. I would say the number one big headline for Alperen Sengun is last year he showed that not only can he just be on the court on a functional defense, but that he can be a contributor in a really strong defense. And the way that they used him, kind of having him be back on the baseline to keep him out of actions, put him into zone defense along with Steven Adams. The creativity and scheme that Houston used in the playoffs and in the regular season showed that Ime Udoka knows how to be able to use Alperen Sengun's strengths on the defensive side of the ball to be able to maximize him and let his offense shine on the other side. And I don't think his offense got to fully shine last year for a couple of reasons. First, came into the year with a back injury, played through it. It clearly impacted his ability to be able to finish at the rim. It wasn't discussed a lot, but it was pretty obvious if you watched him out there. I think that rim finishing is going to jump back up to where it was in his prior seasons. That was a huge outlier last year that held him back significantly. And I think the addition of Kevin Durant and the departure of Jalen Green is huge, because those Alperen Sengun and Jalen Green never fully meshed as an on-court duo. I think that the play style of Kevin Durant is going to be far more conducive. And it's also because KD can play off ball. We saw that in Phoenix. He can knock down shots without needing to have the ball in his hands and be able to contribute to the spacing in that way, more so than Jalen Green does. does in needing the ball, have the ball in his hands. I think Şengün is going to get more opportunities to be able to be the passing hub that we know he can be, which we saw less of last year. And I think there could be more opportunity for that as well, especially with the cutting ability of players like Amen Thompson and Tari Eason out there on the court with him. I'm really excited about what the season has in store for Alperen Şengün. And there's obviously some divisive element to him. You see that in the range of rankings on him. I think that this is a good moment to be able to invest. Clearly, the Rockets have kind of chosen this path. They believe they could have moved on from Alperen. They did not. I think that they now have him under a long-term contract that I think he's going to see through as a Houston Rocket. We'll see where it goes, but I think this is going to be a massively successful team during the regular season and in the playoffs, and Alperen Şengün is going to be at the core of that.
Yeah, I really like Alperen Şengün. Like I think I said this, maybe I didn't say it. I have him ranked at 17 right now, so right up there with the earliest in this range. Think he's incredibly talented as a player and a really good fantasy player. Wouldn't hate. I know you were just talking about how like it could definitely work in Houston. Wouldn't hate if he did get a fresh start somewhere else on a team that was more. I don't know. I just don't feel like Ime Udoka loves Alperen Şengün. I would prefer it's not like the typical Ime Udoka player, even though it did show improvement this past season. Maybe in a scenario where he is. I don't know, the team is more built around him, I'd feel a little bit better about him. But that's nothing to do with him as a player. That's just the situation that he's in. So super confident in him moving forward, kind of regardless of what happens in that regard. Next few players, Donovan Mitchell, Franz Wagner, Paolo Banchero, Anthony Davis, Jalen Brunson, Darius Garland. Dylan Harper at 31. That's, I believe, where you have him ranked as well. And it's kind of in a pretty consensus range here, not too much differentiating there. And it's actually one spot right in front of De'Aaron Fox, which is pretty interesting. How do you feel about Dylan Harper in this range? And how do you feel about how he'll produce in year one?
I think if the San Antonio Spurs are smart, they're going to play a heavily transition-based attack this year because both De'Aaron Fox and Dylan Harper can absolutely fly. Stephen Castle is going to be able to fit into that kind of environment. This is going to be the advantage that they have, where they have multiple ball handlers who can play super fast, who can get up the court in transition. And, oh, by the way, there's that threat of that big 7'5" guy who can shoot threes coming up behind them. So you better be worried about behind your back as well. I think that's what we're going to see a lot of this year. That's going to be able to get Dylan Harper and De'Aaron Fox out on the court together. You saw defensively how it can work. And this was kind of my big argument in the pre-draft process and even after the draft of why Dylan Harper could fit in with the San Antonio Spurs because of his size and his ability to be able to impact defensively when he's locked in. And there was a lot of times at Rutgers last year where that team was not locked in. It was a kind of a mismanaged situation where the roster around Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper was dreadful. And a lot of times they were not engaged because they just didn't have the level of talent that they needed to be able to compete night to night in the Big Ten. I think you're going to see a dramatic shift. You already saw it in Summer League from Dylan Harper. Go back and watch the couple games that he played, and you can see right away that he not only looked more explosive than we saw at Rutgers, I thought that he just had more physicality than we saw as well. And if he can bring that to the court immediately, I think that he's going to be able to play next to Fox. I think the goal is going to be able to have those guys out together, see what it looks like. This is a trial balloon to be able to see because they haven't signed De'Aaron Fox to that extension yet. They know Dylan Harper is going to be on this team going forward. Can this work? Can this work with the two of these guys? If it can't, they can probably move on from Fox to be able to get quite a haul back for him and continue to be able to build on this younger timeline. But I think it could potentially work. I think this is a team that could end up in the playoffs. I definitely think they could end up in the play-in. And I know that's a tall task in the Western Conference, but I am very bullish on the idea of being able to have Fox and Harper on the court out there together. And I'm looking forward to be able to see what it looks like once we get into October and November.
Yeah, I think during Summer League, and I know we don't take everything in Summer League super seriously into how we evaluate these players in the future, but Harper defensively was definitely something that stood out. And then also he was playing off the ball a good bit, which gave me confidence that him and Fox could definitely make that work during the regular season together. So excited to see about that. Keeping it moving after Fox, Trey Murphy, Desmond Bane. I'm not going to go through every player now, but I do kind of want to see where we can find some value with maybe where there is a nice gap between where players are valued. And there's a couple in this range. And of course, I want to take the opportunity, if we can, to talk about Dyson Daniels, who's ranked as high as 31 and as low as 51. And you kind of fall right in the middle there at 41. And you were talking about it earlier with Trae Young, and of course it's talking about another Hawk here, but where just dominating one category or dominating two categories doesn't necessarily help you win a ton, because Dyson Daniels probably has a very strong chance to lead the league in steals again next season. And while he's improved in a number of different categories, he's still not a great free throw shooter or a great 3-point shooter. He's, okay for points, rebounds, assists, but doesn't really help you too much in a number of different categories. It's a lot is reliant on steals, which is why he was a top 20 player in 9-cat leagues this past season. And at 22 years old, we still don't necessarily have him ranked as high as other players that finish that high and are that young. And it's because of the outlier steals. Is that how you're feeling as well, and why you have him at 41?
Yeah. So with Dyson Daniels, you probably, if you had him on your roster last year in Dynasty or redraft, you probably won steals most every week. And sometimes you probably won it by a good amount. If he had 4 games, you might have run away with the category, but you didn't get more than a point for winning that category because you won it by 8, 9, 10 steals. You just won it the same way if you would have won it by 1 steal. And yes, it matters that he pushes the needle, that he moves the needle to be able to win that category every week. That absolutely matters. But otherwise, he's not really moving the needle in anything else. Now, my point would be this. I love Dyson Daniels coming out of G League Ignite. I had him higher in my Dynasty rankings, my rookie rankings coming out of that. And I was strongly advising people who followed my content to be able to hold him through kind of being, on the fringes of the rotation in New Orleans, getting traded over to Atlanta. Before last season, we were sounding the alarm bell to be like, this is the guy you want to be able to get in redraft and in Dynasty. And that paid off. And I still think there's more to him. Because of his size, because of his ball handling ability. He does everything pretty well. And he's still only 22 years old. So I think it's very easy when we see a player make a leap the way that Dyson Daniels did last season to be able to say, all right, we know what he is now. He's still 22. It is extremely common to be able to see players at 24, 25 years old make another leap. He just did it earlier than most players do a lot. And he came into the league at a young age. So we're now seeing at least a lot of what Dyson Daniels can be in the NBA, but I don't think everything. And I don't know for sure that it's going to come. So progression and development in the NBA is not linear. You just don't get 10 or 15% better every season when you're a young player. And I think a lot of people get frustrated and impatient too early because they don't see a player improve in their second, third, or fourth season in one of those. And they say, well, this guy's a bust because he didn't get any better than he was as a rookie. And then all of a sudden in that third, fourth, or fifth year, they make that big leap finally. And it happens for different guys at different times because they're different players, different skill sets, different development tracks. I still think there's more with Dyson Daniels because there are so many tools there. I would love to be able to see him get more on-ball opportunity. We saw that a little bit more when Trae Young went down last year, and there was some improvement in the per-minute stats. So let's wait and see. There's some homework to be able to be done this year. We want to continue to see the three-point shooting volume come up. We want to continue to see the half-court efficiency come up. We want to continue to see the playmaking grow. And we're going to be looking out for those things this year because if we start to see those hints, maybe this is a guy that eventually grows into that kind of top 25 dynasty player. And you still get those great steals, but you're also getting all of this other stuff that comes from a guy who can handle the ball, can create, can score for himself a little bit, and maybe some of those skills develop into something even stronger, and we have something really special here.
Yeah, I would argue that after this season, it's probably going to be a really nice buy low opportunity for him because if we're looking at what he did last year, averaged 6 rebounds, 4.5 assists per game. That was with Jalen Johnson out for a good bit of the year. So Dyson Daniels' importance goes up with Jalen Johnson out. Now with Jalen Johnson back, they add in Nickeil Alexander-Walker, they add in Luke Kennard. Like Dyson Daniels' need to be on the ball all the time, or whenever Trae Young wasn't, kind of decreases. So maybe some of those numbers go down. Maybe he sees fewer shot attempts. Maybe the steals aren't at 3 per game this year. Maybe it's only at 2.3. Oh no, like obviously that's still elite, but it's just not quite the outlier that it was. So maybe after this year, it is a good opportunity to kind of buy low on Dyson Daniels. But I think, you mentioned the potential shooting improvement. One thing that playing next to Trae Young is going to get you is open 3-pointers. Like that's just going to happen because he's one of the best offensive creators that the NBA has. So Dyson Daniels is going to get some good looks. Now he just needs to hit them. which hasn't really happened. I mean, it's only been 1 year playing with Trae Young, so maybe it'll start happening more. It didn't really happen much in New Orleans, so we'll be keeping an eye on that. All right. So then after Dyson Dales, we get into some of these older players here. And then it gets into, I guess, here's an interesting one. Alex Sarr at 45. And you're definitely on the lower end of this for how you value Sarr, because I believe you are the lowest with having him at 73. But someone had him as high as 34, which is even higher than I have him. And I have him at 44. And I remember when we did the mock draft, I took him way earlier than you said you would have. And I think that the idea of Alex Sarr is, there's a lot of exciting things. We saw him have the 8-block game during Summer League, and those things are great. But the offensive game, still a lot of question marks there. Why do you feel like you are the lowest on Alex Sarr in these rankings?
I think Alex Sarr is one of the more challenging players to be able to rank because it is a combination of a really high ceiling for fantasy and I think a really low floor as well. And here's what I mean by that. With Sarr, you saw the highs at Summer League, the shot blocking, the defensive ability, the way that he moves at his size, it is special. And you could easily see him becoming a kind of all defense level player who can cover massive amounts of ground on the court while also protecting the rim. That kind of player who kind of shrinks the floor down in an NBA where the spacing has expanded the floor so significantly, that's huge in the modern NBA. So I can absolutely see it working on that end. I believe in him on that end. The issue is entirely on the other side of the ball. And I get it. He puts up threes, so that makes you think, okay, this can be a little bit like a Miles Turner, a Jaren Jackson Jr. And yeah, that is kind of the ideal outcome here, that you're going to be able to protect the rim on one side of the court, that you're going to be able to score on the other side, at least by shooting threes. With Jaren Jackson, he's developed more as a driver. With Sarr, the issue is he very much plays defensively like he's his size. Offensively, he plays like a much smaller player. He is far too willing to just put up threes rather than putting his head down and driving to the basket. He does everything well for a center-sized player, but not at the level that is going to be able to separate him offensively, at least yet. So what I worry about, and this might be just a player archetype that I struggle with a little bit more, is that I don't see him adapting to the physicality of the NBA at his size that he needs to. He needs to be like Evan Mobley and willing to get downhill, use his solid handle for his size to be able to challenge and pressure and move toward the rim. He did not show a strong willingness to be able to do that last year. And maybe it will come, but it was to such an extreme degree that it said there is a huge leap that would need to come in his style of play offensively for me to be able to see him getting there. And if he's not a knockdown three-point shooter, then gets really difficult to be able to make it work, because the lack of interior presence offensively and the ability to finish at the rim offensively is something that is not really sustainable if you're going to be a team center at this level. You can still be Miles Turner, kind of like, be a little bit allergic to the paint to some degree, but not to the degree that we saw with Sarr. That's my concern. And obviously, I still have him at number 73 in my rankings, number 69 in points rankings. I like him a lot, and I think that the ceiling is there. I am just a little bit more tempered, and I see the downside risk as well. And that's what I want people to be able to understand, that this is not a lock that this guy is going to be a perennial top 50, top 40 fantasy player going forward. If he was, he'd be much higher for me.
Yeah, and I think the points you bring up, it's kind of funny because it's like that's what he basically said during his pre-draft process is, I don't want to be in the paint, which is why there was the reports that he wanted to play power forward, not center, and not go to the Hawks because they had power forward established. Obviously, Washington didn't care. They ended up making him play center a ton during his rookie year, and maybe that's good for him long term to get that experience. Maybe they don't want him to be the center long term. They could have taken a center this year. They didn't, so we'll see what happens in the future. Right now, it looks like he is the center, even though it kind of seems like he doesn't want to play center. We'll see. Maybe he'll just start hitting threes at an insane rate and be able to play power forward. But obviously, there's probably going to have to be some changes there. Here's one of the more controversial ones and probably a good opportunity to buy low. Zion Williamson, as high as 28, as low as 86. If you are the guy that has Zion and have been dying to get rid of him, we need to find whoever had him ranked 28th, and you need to show everyone in your league, hey, Zion is the 28th best player in Dynasty leagues, and try and trade him away. And if it's the opposite, that you go grab the 86 and you say, hey, Zion's 86. Let me find someone in that range. Obviously, I think we know why there's such a wide range of outcomes on Zion, but why do you kind of end up actually landing pretty close to the middle here on Zion?
This is what's so challenging with him. And I think actually someone brought up the point, why are we not treating LaMelo Ball this way? And I think that's fair to some degree, because neither one has been entirely available. I like LaMelo Ball's fantasy stat set so much more than I like Zion Williamson's, that is why I continue to, kind of be loosey with the football every year with LaMelo, where I convince myself that it's going to work out this time, and then it gets yanked away from me. But with Zion Williamson, I think that there's a realistic chance that we see that stretch of what we saw last year, where suddenly the defensive stats were coming back into play. Suddenly we were seeing the scoring at the elite level that we had seen, in his second season coming back into play. The athleticism isn't quite at the same level that it was, obviously, when he was at Duke, or even like super early in his career, because I think there has been some toll to the amount of injuries that he's had. But I'm not willing to fully give up on the idea that he can stay a little bit healthier, that maybe he's going to finally figure it out as he sees his NBA mortality kind of coming before his face a little bit more. That non-guaranteed strange contract that he has going, it sounds like it's going to rumble into next year. They're going to try it one more time, but he's going to need that other contract soon. So we might get the opportunity for him to try to get in a little bit better shape, try to make himself a little bit more available. I'm grasping at straws here a little bit with Zion, because he has only had one season where he's been available for more than 30 games, and we're 5 years deep in. So the definition of insanity is having the same thing happen over and over again and expecting a different result. And I think that's where we are at this point to some degree with Zion. It's just too difficult to be able to quit the talent entirely. But I've shifted him down in my rankings a little bit kind of each year, with the idea that the hope is starting to fade a little bit more and more. If it doesn't happen in New Orleans this year, my guess is someone else will give him another opportunity. And that's part of it too, that the NBA is probably not going to entirely quit on Zion Williamson, because when he is on the court, he is incredibly impactful. He is able to get to the rim against anyone. No one can stay in front of him. No one can defend him. And that will continue to get him opportunities. So as long as the NBA is going to continue to be willing to give him chances, I think we have to some degree, still be willing to give him chances to be able to see how it works out. We have had players where they started their career and just were completely unavailable. People forget now that Bradley Beal could not stay in the court in Washington at the beginning of his career. And now people think, oh, well, now he can't again. Well, there was that big stretch in the middle where he was one of the most productive players in fantasy in Washington, was available all of the time, and it wasn't an issue. Steph Curry, it looked like ankle injuries were going to completely rob his career at the beginning in Golden State. He needed to teach himself how to run completely differently to be able to avoid ankle injuries. He needed to be able to wear ankle braces to avoid injuries, but he found a way to do it. Is Zion Williamson willing to change to be able to get to that place? Those are smaller players that we just talked about. They don't have the body type that Zion Williamson does. I understand that. They had a commitment to be able to figure it out with their body that maybe Zion Williamson doesn't have. I understand all of that. But this idea that just because it happened in the past means that is definitely how it will happen in the future, go ahead and look back in history. We know that's not true in the NBA or in fantasy basketball, so that hope remains. We will keep that light on just to be able to see if it can work out for Zion Williamson, because if it does, it will be special. It's just getting late early with him, and I'm losing faith a little bit, but I'm willing to be able to keep it open for at least one more year.
Yeah, because I mean, he's just that talented, and he was really, really productive to end last season. I think the main thing to me is the improvement in the passing. Like, point Zion was kind of a thing, and if we're able to see him be somewhat healthy, but we've already seen him play really well, play at a high level, improved statistically, which is also nice. Worst case scenario this year, he gets hurt again. He ends up out of New Orleans, and we get to see him have a fresh start on a team that's not cursed, apparently, because nobody can stay healthy in New Orleans. So maybe that's all it takes, is for Zion to play somewhere else. Moving on to some of these next few players. I mean, we'll try and go a little bit further down. And if you're watching, you can just kind of keep an eye on things just to try and see where we can maybe find some value, or any of these players sticking out to you, Matt, as guys that you really want to talk about where you think there can be some nice value found.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about Lauri Markkanen because I'm considerably higher than consensus on Lauri right now. And I think there's a few reasons for that. Number one, we're all sick of what's been happening in Utah. Them, playing, messing around with their lineups, refusing to be able to play guys. The fact that we don't see Markkanen in the second half of seasons at all, that's when fantasy playoffs are. I get it. We're exhausted with it. I do genuinely think because they have gotten rid of all of the guys other than Markkanen who are going to be putting winning basketball onto the court in Utah this year. It is not going to matter, if him and Walker Kessler play game after game this season, because the guard play is going to be a bunch of rookies or second or third year players. They don't have the wings to be able to defend or even be able to keep afloat offensively in the NBA outside of what they get from Markkanen. I think that he's going to be allowed to play. They're going to try to rebuild his value at the very least so they can try to trade him at the trading deadline. Because right now that contract's underwater, at least in the perception of people. He got paid. He makes a significant amount of money. And anyone who adds him wants to be able to think that he can probably be the second best player on their team. No one's trading for that right now who's contending. So I think that there's going to be a big push for Markkanen. I know that Will Hardy can craft an offense that can get Lauri Markkanen endless good looks, and he's going to knock them down. Last season, they not only did he play through some injury early on, he also was trying to do more on ball, which is not his natural strength. They were just kind of letting him, explore the studio space, do things that he didn't do in prior seasons. It didn't work. And I get that. And a lot of people are done with him because of it. I think we're going to see a big bounce back this season with him. So this is a buying opportunity. There's probably managers in your dynasty leagues who are sick of Lauri Markkanen. They've had him on their roster. They don't think he's ever going to play. They're looking at the Jazz and saying, this team's going to be tanking again. Maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe this is just like Zion, where I'm just going to get fooled again. I think Lauri Markkanen is actually going to play games this year. And I think when he plays, he's going to be super impactful. He's one of the big buys of this offseason because I think the price could be surprisingly low.
Well, yeah, the Jazz have already said they're going to try and win games this year. They're done tanking and followed that up by trading away every other veteran on this team. So, yeah, I'm assuming Lauri Markkanen's going to play early, and then they'll probably ship him off at the deadline. And just hopefully at that point he's done enough to improve his value so they're able to get some sort of compensation back. Trying to look down to, I guess, outside the top 100 for consensus rankings and see where we can find maybe some interesting value here. There's a lot of the rookies. Damian Lillard out here at 121. Let me ask you about Jaden Ivey, actually, now that this is coming up, because I've had, I guess, like one or two dynasty questions recently about trade value for him. And Jaden Ivey, I think, is a guy that maybe last year at this time, or maybe it was even farther back than that, was a guy that was probably in like the 50s, 60s, 70s for a lot of different dynasty rankings. And now the high is 117, the low is 166. Why has everyone soured on Jaden Ivey? Is it the fact that Detroit just had their best season ever and he wasn't around for that playoff run? Do we still have confidence that he can get back, like improve his value later on?
So I come from this from two different perspectives. First, I don't think I ever had Jaden that high because I had concerns about the fantasy stat set. And it was because he didn't shoot threes at a high level at Purdue, never consistently. And on top of that with Jaden, I felt like his lack of defensive stats was a big issue for him, and it's continued to be in the NBA. Now, the way that you were going to be able to get big contribution from him are areas where he needs to be able to have the ball. That's points and assists. That's going to be a challenge to at least some degree. There's going to be a cap on that because the show is going to run through Cade Cunningham. With all of that said, as a on-court player in real life, I thought Jaden Ivey made massive strides last season. I thought he was really good. And I think that he does fit next to Cade Cunningham. I think they will stagger minutes between him and Cade. So the non-Cade minutes will be run by Jaden Ivey. I think the three-point shooting improvement working with Fred Vinson is real. And he's going to continue to make strides in that area and improve the volume. I think Jaden Ivey is going to get a contract extension, and we'll see if the Pistons are able to get him on a more reasonable deal and lock that in. Ivey might hold out to be able to bet on himself through the season, but I do ultimately think the Pistons are going to end up signing him to a contract extension and a big second contract that keeps him in Detroit. And for all of those reasons, I'm bullish on him. The problem is, if we're going to see the next phase for Jaden Ivey to become a consistent top 100, top 75 fantasy player, some of the fantasy stat set restrictions are going to have to change. And I think that could come with the 3-point shooting. I think that could be an area where he improves. I think he could improve his efficiency so the field goal percentage isn't as much of the negative. He's not going to be a strong rebounder. But I could see him continuing to improve in his playmaking to be able to see those assists come up as well. And maybe we get to a point where he did make some defensive strides last year, going from kind of unplayable at times early in his career to at least being, neutral to slightly below neutral, which worked on this roster. He at least made effort. He competed. I think we could see improvement in the steals as his ability to be able to process the game improves, because he certainly has the physical tools to be able to get steals. So if the free throw percentage ticks up a little bit, it could just be incremental improvement in a lot of different areas. And suddenly we could see a guy whose stat set looks more like top 125-ish become a stat set that's more top 75-ish. And suddenly we have a completely different fantasy player who's not even 24 years old yet, who has his full prime ahead of him. So that's the case to be able to see it happen for Jaden Ivey. And I think it's realistic because there were significant improvements as a winning basketball player last season in Detroit before he went down with that injury.
All right, let's try and get one more player out of these category rankings. And then I do want to talk about points leagues just briefly, because there's a lot of interesting players in this range now that I'm scrolling through. And a lot of the rookies, I think, end up around here. Let's talk. Oh, okay. Actually, let's get somebody that you're extra high on, as opposed to, I was going to ask about Ron Holland, because I saw somebody had him ranked very low at 239, I believe. We'll talk about Jonathan Kuminga because you're a good bit higher on him, I think, than everyone else. I think you have him highest at 115. He's at low as 195 here. Ends up pretty close to the middle with the average at 158.9 for the average ranking, and then right at 160. What has you so confident in Jonathan Kuminga, and does that, I guess, your ranking factor in that he's back in Golden State, or factor in that he ends up elsewhere?
I'm very confident that he's not going to be in Golden State going forward. I think that both Kuminga's camp, Steve Kerr, have made it very clear that neither side really wants this to be a long-term marriage. The Warriors have never believed in Kuminga in their system, and I think that lack of belief has hurt in the ability to be able to get Jonathan Kuminga to buy into being a role player in that system. I think he will end up moving on. I think he's really talented. He has an ability to be able to draw a 3-level scoring ability that he has shown at different stages in Golden State that I think could end up shining somewhere else. This is another one of these players that's extremely difficult to rank, because that range that you see in rankings from 115 to 195, I can easily see the argument for both of those, especially because I think I am that number 115. But I can also see the downside. I can see the 195, because it's entirely possible that it never fully works out for Jonathan Kuminga, because the threshold to be a high usage on ball player the way that Kuminga wants to be is extremely high. There are only so many guys who get to do that in the NBA, and you have to be good enough at it and have the opportunity on your team to be the best at it to be able to get that chance. And I don't know if Kuminga is going to get that. If he does, there is a chance that he blossoms into something that is much more than number 115 in Dynasty rankings. The ceiling could be significantly higher than that. So how do you weigh that potential ceiling for a guy who I think is about to be on his second team, if not this offseason in a sign and trade, then potentially, later on, once he signs a contract with the Warriors, they move him before or at the trade deadline. That is hard to gauge, because that next team will value him more than the Warriors. That's going to be why they either do a sign and trade for him or trade for him at the deadline. They're going to be doing it with the idea that they're going to be putting him in a different role that he was in Golden State. And we've never gotten to see that for more than, a stretch of a few weeks in his career. So this is a player who could end up jumping up dramatically in dynasty leagues. And I see that future being realistic. And I'm trying to weigh that in the way that I rank him, because I do still have Jonathan Kuminga optimism. I think he can actually be a top level scorer in this league, one of the better scorers in this league, because of the physical tools, because players his size who still have to be able to handle and drive, get to the rim, and also to be able to show some nascent ability to be able to shoot the ball are pretty rare. And I think that those high-level outcomes are still on the table. So for me, that pushes him up higher than others have him in Dynasty rankings.
All right. And just briefly, we will talk about points leagues and just see kind of where the difference is. And there isn't too many differences at the top, other than having Giannis Antetokounmpo, Paolo Banchero. I think those are two of the guys that end up being ranked a little bit higher. I guess it's just a general like points league dynasty thing. Like what types of players end up being ranked a little bit higher in points leagues than they are in category leagues, or lower in points leagues than they are in category leagues?
Yeah, so for my points league managers, this is really important in the difference between these two different sets. I am the only person who I think consistently updates and really separately evaluates points league dynasty rankings. There are only two sets here in this consensus because it's me and it's hashtag basketball. And I want to give all due respect to hashtag basketball. Joey Mamone has done incredible work for fantasy basketball. I don't think fantasy basketball would exist the way that it does if his free resources hadn't been available all of these years. I started playing fantasy basketball seriously, like playing a lot of it. I started like playing it for the first time over 20 years ago. 10 years ago, I really started to play it a lot. And hashtag was the only game in town. He started adding points league rankings more recently. What I find in evaluating them is that they are largely the category rankings that he has for dynasty leagues, with a few players who are different. Someone like RJ Barrett, who is much better in points leagues because he's almost all points, rebounds, assists in his value is much higher. Giannis Antetokounmpo, a little bit higher, things like that. Otherwise, some of the rankings are exactly the same. I do it differently. I evaluate them separately. I look at both Sleeper's default ranking system, the official NBA fantasy scoring system, which are a little bit different. I evaluate those players based on that, and I rank them completely separately from my categories rankings. That's what the attempt that I make to be able to do it. So when you're looking at my consensus points league rankings, the difference that you're seeing is strictly the difference between me and the hashtag rankings, because there's only two ranking sets. It's not the difference between me and the consensus, because that would just be counting me an extra time when there's only two other ranking sets involved. So this is a great way, if you are in a points dynasty league, to be able to go to other managers who maybe follow the hashtag points dynasty league rankings, or even say to them like, hey, this guy's really high in these hashtag basketball points dynasty league rankings, if you believe my take on it. And I give you my word that I'm spending as much time on this, if not more, than anybody to be able to think about it for points leagues. And I think that there's a real value in that as you're going through. The big difference, regardless of points league format, what ends up happening is points leagues end up valuing points, rebounds, and assists more than categories leagues do. Those drive the vast majority of the total points that players score, because those statistics are far more common than steals and blocks. And if you count three-pointers, you're not worrying about efficiency in most points league formats. And even if you are, even if there's some, hit to your score based on missing shots or an improvement for making them, it ends up kind of not making it nearly as much of an impact as it being its own separate category in a categories league. So when you look at my rankings, that's what I'm valuing. That's why you see someone like Paolo Banchero, who has deficiencies in a category league, be a top 10 player in a points league. And if you are only looking at categories-based rankings and you're in a points league, you're going to be a little bit confused by some of the values, because you would say, well, wait, Anthony Davis, is here. Domantas Sabonis is here. Paolo Banchero, Giannis Antetokounmpo. These are all top 10 guys. Why are they not being valued the same way in these rankings that I'm looking at? It's probably because they're skewed toward categories rankings. So this is one of the biggest value adds that I can provide in the dynasty space. I provide trade calculators for points leagues. I provide rookie rankings for points leagues. I provide dynasty rankings for points leagues. If I do it for categories leagues, I do it for points leagues too, because every time I pull it, I find that it's getting closer and closer to 50% on each side of who's playing in dynasty leagues. And that's largely because the Sleeper platform only does points leagues, and it's the best and most intuitive and easiest transition from playing fantasy football and playing dynasty and fantasy football to coming over to fantasy basketball. So every year, friends get together who have a dynasty fantasy football league on Sleeper, and they say, why don't we try basketball this year? And it's an easy on-ramp to be able to come in on Sleeper, and that's the format that you're given. You're already kind of used to it from football, and it makes sense for people to be able to do it, especially with their lock-in mode and their game pick modes, where you're able to pick one performance a week. So it's a little bit more like football, where there's only one performance a week. So those are all things that we're thinking about with these rankings. I would encourage everybody to be able to go over to patreon.com/NBA Dynasty ADP if you play in a points dynasty league, because you're going to be able to get that trade calculator. You're going to be able to get those dynasty rankings, those rookie rankings that are actually geared toward you. You're not going to find that anywhere else, and you're going to be able to get that benefit. And if you play in a categories league, I've got you covered there as well. you're going to be able to find these consensus rankings that are going to be able to help you be able to understand where the opportunities to buy and sell are in the market right now, which I think are going to be extremely valuable. And all of it is free if you sign up for a trial membership. If you like it, stay on for 7 days, continue on with me. If you don't, cancel it, no charge. That's the way that it works. I think that it's a good way to be able to bring people into the fold. I want people to play Dynasty. I want people to have a good experience doing it. I hope that if you like the content, even if you don't stick around for it and you just do the free trial, that you'll come back sometime when you're able to, because I'm going to be here. I'm going to keep putting out this stuff because I want this game to continue to grow. I want people to play Dynasty basketball and have a great experience, and I want you to win your leagues. So that's my pitch on that, and I hope that we get the chance to be able to talk about more points league stuff in the future because it's definitely a growing element of the full pie of Dynasty and fantasy basketball.
For sure. I was going to say, I think we need to maybe next time do a full points league episode, because I know this ended up just being categories league, and that's pretty much like 99% of my content. And I think I'm saying 99 so that I'm not just saying I don't do points league content because I that's generally like I don't as often. So maybe we need to try and do that a little bit more in the future and talk through some of these points consensus rankings, which would end up mostly just being your rankings there as well. And you already mentioned the Patreon. If you play in a points league and want to see this full list or Matt's full rankings, obviously you can see that on his Patreon. Follow him on Twitter at NBA Dynasty ADP as always. And Matt, again, as always, thank you so much for joining me for this. I always enjoy and appreciate the knowledge that you bring to this show.
Thanks, Noah. All
right. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Podcast. We will bring Matt back in in the future. I think next week isn't going to, because I'm out of town, isn't going to be Matt coming back. But after that, should be weekly episodes planning throughout the season. But we'll see how that goes as that approaches, and obviously more mock drafts, more analysis to come in the coming weeks. That's going to do it. Matt, thank you again, and we will see you guys next time.